Hello, everyone. Happy May. Today's Mirror of Intimacy webinar has arrived on this beautiful May day. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, and today is Monday, May 6th, and our topic today is obsession. So that's the thing I most want to talk about, and it's a powerful topic for many reasons that we'll get into. But in the meantime, before we start, I want to remind you about a couple of things. As always, please type your questions in the Q&A box. So do not type your questions in the chat box because I won't be able to answer them if you put them in the chat box. But if you put them in the Q&A box, I can read them. And in the chat box, you will find all sorts of links and resources for how to reach us and how to find the book and things of that nature. So remember that Q&A box, and I'll answer them as we go along. And then also to please leave your comments, your book reviews for me on Amazon, whether it's for Mirror of Intimacy or any other books that you have read that you appreciate, because it helps other readers, as you know, when you go to buy a book, to see what people find useful about the book. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All you have to do is click the button below, and that way you don't miss a post. And oftentimes people will ask questions about whether this is being recorded. And the answer is yes. All of our YouTube videos are on our YouTube channel. So if you go to youtube.com and you type in Center for Healthy Sex, you will find all of the Mirror of Intimacy webinars over the past, gosh, going on 10 years now. You can also keep up with us with what we're doing by following me on Instagram at Alex Katehakis or at Center for Healthy Sex. And lastly, I want to remind you that my first installment of my new webinar series based on my workbook called What Turns You On, A Guide to Living Your Best Sex Life, will be launching on June 3rd. And this new series will explore healthy sexuality and help you answer the question, what turns you on? I think that question changes as we age, every 5 years, 10 years. And so I am excited to share this new series with you. So make sure you join our mailing list by visiting centerforhealthysex.com and signing up under the Contact Us section so you can be sure to register. Okay, so without further ado, as they say, the quote today is from Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and he writes, "To him, she seems so beautiful, so seductive, so different from ordinary people, that he could not understand why no one was as disturbed as he was by the clicking of her heels on the paving stones, why no one else's heart was wild with the breeze stirred by the sighs of her veils, why everyone did not go mad with the movements of her braid, the flight of her hands, the gold of her laughter. He had not missed a single one of her gestures, not one of the indications of her character. But he did not dare approach her for fear of destroying the spell." So that is the beautiful passage, is it not, of the exquisite detail in which he paid attention to this woman, how captivating she was to him, how magical she was to him, every sigh, sound, movement, but he did not dare approach her for fear of destroying the spell. And if that isn't the crux of love addiction, I don't know what is. This idea that I need you, or I need my object of desire, my object of obsession to remain perfect, to be pristine, to not do anything that I would find agitating or find unappealing. Or imagine if that woman, that gorgeous object of his desire, had a voice that he couldn't stand. Or he found out something about her that he couldn't stand, then the entire spell would be destroyed. So this passage today, Obsession, you will find as the May 13th entry in Mirror of Intimacy. And that's what we're going to talk about today, about how obsession in itself can destroy the ordered life that we work so hard to build. When you think about the routine of your life, um, perhaps your work or your career, like all the things you've put into building even a family, and the orderliness with which you do that, and how easily obsession can destroy that because it averts our attention from the things that are most important to us into this world of fantasy or into this captivating spell rather, that Garcia Marquez talks about. So this can be, for those of you that have ever been in obsession, and I know I certainly have, it can be like a black hole that sucks all time, emotion, thought, and energy away from us. And the other thing it does is it gives this sort of perverse sense that my life has meaning, like something's going on in my life because I'm feeling a little wayward. I'm not sure what direction I want to go in. Like I'm struggling in a particular way. And instead of sitting in the struggle and in the emptiness of that or the loneliness, um, hanging on to an obsession about a current love object or a former love object or a love object that's not reciprocating can give this sense of meaning and purpose. Obsession originally meant a blockade or a siege. So think about that, a blockade or a siege. But in the 1600s, it came to signify haunting by an evil spirit, which I just love, this notion of being haunted by an evil spirit, where we're ascribing some supernatural power to this thing that runs around in our head over and over and over again. Um, and fixation on a certain person, a goal, or an object might start innocently enough, like, oh, I really like that thing or that person. Um, but it can become our sole focus, so much so that we're not involved in or we're excluding other healthy activities and interests. So before we know it, all we're doing is thinking about, planning about, scheming about, imagining that person. And preoccupation, in that kind of obsessive, ruminative way, is one of the early earmarks of any kind of addiction. Whether you're a drug addict seeking drugs, or you're somebody who's compulsive shopping and you just cannot get that particular pair of shoes out of your head, and you know you can't afford them, but you go to the store and you look at them and you try them on, and you might even consider stealing them. Like it starts to unwind in this very profound and even dangerous way. And then all of our other healthy activities get excluded. We forget about things that bring us joy, or friends or family members or people. And this is the nature of a cunning, debilitating stranglehold that obsession can have on us. And so take a moment to think about this question or ask yourself, have I ever been obsessed with a person or a thing to the extent that it has really taken me out of my life? Um, and that can go for any number of things that we can get involved in. I mean, I remember after 9/11, people were just glued to their televisions, obsessed with watching the television reels over and over and over again. And they were coming into the office looking so traumatized and so sick because they had become fixated on this event. And just a reminder, I live here on the West Coast. And so while we were paying rapt attention to what was happening in New York on that day and the coming days, it didn't happen in our city. But when people were coming into therapy, they looked as if they had been at the scene of the crime because they became so obsessed with all of that. And that can happen with what's going on in the news today with the wars and the protests. They become diversions from our daily life. They pull us out of life and they give us a sense of adrenaline and excitement and that something is going on. So be mindful about what you take in, where you put your focus, what you become obsessed about. And lifelong obsessions can have their roots in childhood, certainly, when caregivers obsess about our behaviors or they neglect us. And that can instill in us a drive to grasp for something that we didn't receive, whether it's we're grasping for love or food, because food can certainly be an obsession also, then we are grasping for that which we didn't receive. And we also have carried shame from that caregiver, and that can fester like an unintended wound until it consumes us. Because that shame, it gets handed down generationally. Sometimes we know now into the third generation that trauma and shame get carried. So as adults, the unconscious yearns to resolve these problems. It yearns to fix and meet these unmet needs. And it can make us latch frantically onto another person for safety. And that can obsess or form into an obsessive relationship. So think about that now also, if that's ever been the case for you. What is it that you're longing for, yearning for? I mean, typically, sex and love addicts are desperately seeking validation, love, belonging, a sense that they matter, or even garnering their self-esteem from another. And so you have to be very careful about that and ask yourself, why am I chasing this person? Especially when it's unrequited love, when it's not reciprocated. They're not asking you out or trying to get back together with you or telling you they love you as much as you think they love them. So there's a whole host of problems that occur as a result of this obsession. So a reminder to please type your questions into the chat box, and I mean the Q&A box, sorry, not the chat box. Now here's a question here. I have a married client who reports a long-term 15-year romantic relationship with a female coworker. He reports not crossing any boundaries, but the obsession has a quality of this black hole that you described. He's gone long periods of time without sex in his marriage. Periodically will look at porn and masturbate, which he feels lots of shame and guilt about. Is it appropriate to consider this a kind of sexual anorexia? Um, well, yes. I mean, this is a person that's living in a one-person system that's avoidant of relationships. So this person would do really well to go to Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. And I'm not going to elucidate what treatment would be here, or what that would involve, that program would involve, but that program would give him or her a direction for how to start to get out of this obsession, to get into reality about the life that they're leading and the choice they're making, and making choices about what kind of life they want to have. Because when we live in obsession, we're living in fantasy. And even if we're in this emotionally obsessive relationship with somebody that we never have sex with, it's an as if relationship. And so you have to ask yourself, at the end of your life, are you going to look back and say, wow, that fantasy I had about that person for 25 years that was never consummated, that I never got to spend holidays with, that I never got to travel with and explore the world with, was it really worth sitting on the sidelines with somebody who I didn't know that well? They just lived in my fantasy. And was it worth living with a companion who wasn't really there for me and I couldn't be there for them? We did not really love deeply. So what is, in my best interest here is the question. And where can I get the help I need to at least stop the obsession temporarily, to get a grip on what does the landscape of my life look like and what is it that I actually want? So consider that obsessions can sometimes extend beyond human interactions into work or everyday habits like hand washing. And then obsession turns into, obsessive compulsive disorder. But whatever their nature are, these obsessions can have us feeling incredibly isolated and disconnected and disturbed internally. It can be a very lonely place to be. Somebody writes, do you have any tips for ridding yourself of carried shame? Asking from a perspective of a former partner that was cheated on for several years without ever knowing. Well, typically carried shame comes from our parents, from our primary caregivers. And it really requires a deep therapeutic investigation. I mean, John Bradshaw wrote a beautiful book called Healing the Shame That Binds You. That's always a great starting point. But I would suggest that you start to look more deeply and dig more deeply into yourself, and look at the way that person made you feel shame, the way you were meant to feel shame in your own childhood, and where it actually started, and now how it has perpetuated and how you've carried it forward. So you don't, um, transmit it to your children either. Someone writes, my partner rightly recognized my obsession with her and asked for a break. With time and work, can I reorient? I break obsession and rekindle. Can I break obsession and rekindle a healthy connection? I would say yes, because what may happen is that when you really start to look at your obsession with this person, you'll start to see that you didn't know that person well at all. They just became an object of your desire, and that object could be anybody. So when you start to get healthier, when you stop the obsession, when you start to realize that you're doing that to leapfrog the discomfort, the awkwardness of having to get to know somebody, really get to know somebody, and have an exchange where they get to know you also, where you're both human beings having a human experience, you might find that when you really get to know that person, you don't actually like them, or they're not right for you at all. You were just, grabbing any warm body that came along because you so desperately wanted to be in relationship with them. And that's not love. That is, in Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, they say that's taking a hostage. Because again, it's a warm body. It's someone that I can have around and say I have a relationship with, but I don't know who they are because I need them to be a certain way and look a certain way. It's just like the quote that we started with, that he was so captivated by his perceptions of her that he didn't want to actually get to know her because it would break the spell of perception. And so I give you a lot of kudos because you're saying, hey, I'm willing to go work on myself to break this spell, to find out if that person is even the right person for me or not. So your partner is really doing you a service, certainly taking care of herself, but also um, cares about you enough to say, go do the work you need to do. And that is a gift. So think about how we idolize people. Like we will idolize somebody that we think is a genius. Um, or idolize people that have a one-track mind because we think they're so spectacular in that way. For example, a musician can get fixated on mastering an instrument, and that is a one-track mind. And it has to get a level of mastery at anything. You have to become obsessed with and fixated on that particular art form or practice to get really good at it. Just like an athlete might zero in on achieving a world record, or a business person might seek victory over competitors at all costs, or building a particular thing. These single-minded focuses are necessary in order to get really good at whatever it is you want to get really good at and do. But there are costs for that. We have to recognize that regardless of whether an obsession is self-improving or self-destructive, it can wreck the equilibrium of our lives, of all of areas of our lives, our intellectual areas, our physical areas, artistic, moral, emotional. And we need all of those things in concert in order to sustain a happy, healthy life. And, in our culture, we don't, we talk about balance and having it all and all of these sort of, health and biological hacks. But the truth is, they're all contradictory. You cannot work yourself into a pulp and also be healthy. You cannot be single focused in your artistic endeavor where you're painting constantly, and also have a balanced social life. It just doesn't work that way. And so if you want to be a balanced person, you may have to give some things up in order to do that. Because isolation comes with obsession and single-minded focus like that. So you have to ask yourself, what is the trade-off for me? Someone writes here, I've certainly found that fixation on sex can be an obsession for me. I find that it happens the most frequently and obsessively when it's something I can't do or not supposed to do. So that's interesting that when it's not available to you, when there's a challenge, that's when it becomes more alluring to you. And you write whether that is a disinterested partner or a history of shame and belief that my own sexuality is wrong. I'm just now beginning to explore acceptance around my own sexuality as I'm going through a divorce. And it seems like obsession that I used to have, or the obsessions I used to have, are dissolving as I find more acceptance in other parts of my life. Well, congratulations to you for that. I have ADHD and go through periods of hyperfocus, which I'm actually learning to value and appreciate. And I think that's really an important piece also, that we have to become friends with who we are, what our temperament is, what our isms are, what our limitations are, all of it. Because if we don't make friends with it, we are just constantly comparing ourselves to other people and we're tortured. And people with ADHD have limitations, but they're also wildly smart and creative people. And so, how do you parlay that? How do you direct that in ways that are constructive and creative for you is the question now. Um, from my current perspective, these two things seem to be incompatible, and I can't seem to imagine what a relationship would even look like where I embrace my interest of the moment, accept my sexuality, and not go into obsessions with sex, the person, or a relationship. So, how do I accept intensity without going into obsession? Well, I think this is a practice, and the practice becomes about, first of all, getting to know yourself and loving yourself, which I know sounds cliche, but if you don't really get to know yourself and how you operate, every time you get in a relationship with somebody else, you will throw yourself out the window and go chase after them, as opposed to saying, you know what? I have to get up at the same time every morning and brush my teeth. And then I have to go for a walk. And after that, I've got to make lists to arrange my day because my short-term memory is not good and I don't remember anything. And until I have my list made for the day and I know what my schedule looks like, I really can't plan a date with anybody. I can't plan a lunch. I can't be spontaneous because it throws everything into chaos for me. And that is who I am. And if I can't find one person in the billions of people on this planet who can hang with that, then that's a problem. But I don't think you're going to have that problem. I think when you say no to people who cannot um, roll with the way your life is, the way you need to be, then you shouldn't go out with that person. So when you start to give up your routine and give up what's true for you for somebody else, you are in trouble. You are in your love addiction, an obsession. And when you can hold your boundaries about what's true for you, and I'm not talking about being rigid or impossible. I'm saying you can be flexible, but you also have to know how far you can flex, especially when you have ADHD before chaos comes into your life. And then you don't know where your footing is again, and you can't be productive and get your life going. So again, these are great questions for an SLAA program, which you can find online and all over the country. And maybe you don't need to work a 12-step program, but certainly going and listening to these meetings and reading some of their literature so you can see some of the measures you can take to make your life a little bit more manageable, and so that you get into a relationship with the kind of people that can honor what your issues are and your limitations are, because we all have them. Someone's writing, have you seen people go to 12-step meetings to avoid sexuality and pray it away? Labeling oneself as a sex addict as expression of curious shame rather than a path to healing. No, I can't say in the 25 years I've been practicing that I've seen that. Now, that may be a result of living in a city where SAA is a big community, but this idea of praying something away is highly problematic to me. And as a therapist, I would intervene on that because it doesn't work that way. if somebody is really struggling with sexual issues, they need to face their sexual issues. And if prayer and meditation is part of their overall program, great. But to strictly say, I'm going to go do that is living in more fantasy. And I think anybody who is spiritual or even has a healthy religious practice would agree with that. Um, and I've never seen people using sex addiction um, as an excuse for their carried shame. Most sex addicts know they have a ton of shame, both carried shame and then the shame they have from their sexual behaviors. And they want to get rid of that shame. They don't want to just cover it up. I mean, nobody wants to be labeled a sex addict. That is not people's favorite thing to do. So it's really about reducing shame, is what 12-step programs do when they're healthy programs. Their primary directive is shame reduction, not shame induction. And if that were the case, I certainly would not be recommending it. All right. So think about what um, organizes your day. And if you've got a pretty healthy, balanced life, and you see friends and you're also painting like a madwoman or madman and you love it, but then you see your family on the weekends or you travel here and there, then great. Or maybe you paint for months at a time and then you come out of that and then you do other things in your life. But just look at what areas of your life might be missing because of your obsession. So drive, dedication, and discipline are all valuable tools. I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't use those tools to achieve the goals in your life. But what makes us human is our ability to balance these many goals at once. And we also live in a culture it advertises to us that we can have it all and we can do it all. And the truth is, 8 hours are not many hours in a day. And we cannot have and do it all. We really have to pick and choose what has meaning to us. So I would recommend that you maybe take out a piece of paper and look at your life and say, where's my life at in terms of my goals, my spirituality, my family, my friends, my career, my hobbies, my recreational activities. I mean, that's like 6 or 7 categories there, my health and well-being, and go through and look at how much time you spend on those things and prioritize them, which matter to you. And if you're only operating in one of those columns, you're probably in trouble. And so you want to have an integrated sense of self the best you can. And there are some things that you're going to have to let go because you'll have competing agendas. You can't be a vagabond and decide that you are going to travel around the globe or backpack around the globe this year or even for a summer while also learning to play the piano. Because playing the piano requires that you're home and you practice every day and you go to piano lessons and maybe you join a band where there's a keyboardist needed and that you're immersing yourself in piano playing. That doesn't lend itself to backpacking around the Far East this summer. So look at what you're doing and how those things align in your life. So consider practicing the 3-second rule when you're gripped by romantic or sexual obsession. So the first second is acknowledge that you're in an obsessed state. Like just snap out of it and notice that you're there. That's a big part of interrupting that pattern. Then recognize that you didn't have permission to objectify that person. You didn't walk up to that person and say, you know what, you look really nice today, or I was just appreciating you from afar, and let them either say thank you or wow, that's creepy, get away from me. But it's non-consensual, especially if you're obsessing and starting to imagine having sex with them or looking at a body part. And then at at some point you can say a prayer, and I don't mean this in a religious sense necessarily. I mean it more secularly, if you're inclined. Just say some statement that respects their privacy, and then turn your attention to the present moment. So that might be a statement of saying, wow, that's somebody's daughter, or that's somebody's mother, or I wish that person well in their day to day. And then just repeat that as needed. And those are just three different tiny steps that you can do to intervene on fantasy and obsession, which, you can conjure for yourself also if those three don't suit you. But the idea is to snap out of that dissociative state. And again, it's a mildly dissociative state. Um, you might find that you're gawking and you don't want to be that guy or a female that just gawks at people, because that can make people feel kind of creepy that you're looking at them in some kind of strange way. Um, and then just say to yourself, wow, I'm going to wish that person well. And then how do you ask yourself the question, how you tell the difference between healthy and unhealthy obsession? And today, I mean, when I think about unhealthy obsession, sometimes if I'm, out and about or I'm shopping or I see something and I'm not sure whether I want it or not, I don't just impulsively buy it. I tell myself, if I'm really thinking about this by the end of next week, it means I'm obsessing about it and I really want it. And if it's just gone away, it was just like something I didn't need and I didn't need to spend the money on. So that's how I play with obsession about things. In my own head. So find ways where you can tell the difference between healthy and unhealthy obsession. And then today disclose one obsession, a hobby, a romantic interest, a recurring subject of gossip with three people you respect. And focus on any confusion or discomfort you feel about your focus. So you might say to them, I'm just obsessing endlessly about something somebody said about me last week, and I can't stop thinking about it. And I'm confused because on the one hand, I feel like I should say something to them. On the other hand, I feel like I should just let it go. And I don't know what to do. And so if I could just talk it out with you, that would be really helpful to me. And that way you don't end up, calling somebody that you shouldn't, or writing them a nasty note you later regret doing, or doing something at work that you really regret doing. So be in consultation with other people. Ask friends and family members to help you when they're safe enough people to do so. Someone says, can you speak more about childhood experiences and how later in life we're obsessed with relationships, the early childhood signs to look for? Well, I believe children start obsessing in childhood when they are neglected as children or they grow up in chaotic households. So children learn very quickly that they can't get their needs met by adults, and they go into fantasy, whether it's a Marvel comic character or some rock and roll musician that's going to save them and rescue them. So it's some story about someday my prince or someday my princess will come. And these fantasies can start to reach pretty big proportions in kids. And fantasy, again, is a dissociative pathway in the brain. So I'm not talking about 4 and 5-year-olds who are constantly in fantasy and they have imaginary characters and imaginary friends and they talk to them. That is a normal developmental task. I'm talking later, 8, 9, 10, 14, 15, where kids start to become isolated and live in these fantasy worlds. And of course, today, with access to the internet, there's, sex and porn that kids can get into also. And so when we are not nurtured, cared for, when our parents don't come and find us to say, how are you doing? What do you need? Or you're spending too much time at home and, alone in your room, let's go for a walk or let's talk, or we do things as a family. The child gets a message that they're not wanted, that the feeling is they're not loved or they don't matter, and they become avoidant and isolated. And those early fantasies, especially the rescue fantasies, are the early fantasies that typical love addicts have. And they can all tell you what they were when they were a kid. So you just want to watch for extreme or extensive isolation in your own kids. And also, of course, today screen time is a big, big deal. How much unfettered time do kids have on screens? And how much unfettered access do they have to the internet, which can also be dangerous? Can you speak to the relationship between obsession and compulsive behaviors like stalking? Well, stalking becomes a more pathological version of obsession. So if I'm obsessing about a pair of shoes and I'm not sure I should get them or not, but let's say I have some really serious issues around power and control and the need to have things, And I start going to that store repeatedly and imagining how I can steal those shoes. Now we're into more stalking behaviors, only it's kleptomania because it's an object, it's a thing that I can be arrested for versus a person who also I could conceivably have charges brought against me for. But people that stalk are generally dealing with profound attachment disruptions from early on, from infancy all the way through childhood into adulthood, where they were repeatedly and violently abandoned. And so they desperately need an object of desire. And when they can't get it, they'll go to every ends possible to get it because they cannot bear the rejection or the abandonment. And so this can be things like, look, we've all done this in either high school with other friends, like girlfriends, driving by a boy's house to see if his car's there, or in college, driving by somebody's dorm to see if their car is there. These are immature behaviors, but as we start to mature and age, we start to realize that they're silly and they're not constructive. But when people engage in these further, they're doing so out of an abject terror of being left, being rejected or abandoned. And then there's rage that comes with it also. They cannot stand that they're being rejected to that extent. And so they will start to stalk the person's house, watch them come and go from their house, consider breaking in or even breaking in. There's a great example of this in Orange is the New Black in the early part of the series, where one of the women that's imprisoned was imprisoned precisely for this kind of really over-the-top behavior. So that can lead to going by somebody's place of work, bringing somebody unwanted flowers, constantly hanging around to the extent that the person who's being stalked starts to feel frightened and then terrified. And it's that point where law enforcement can be brought in for restraining orders. And that's a whole other story, but these are deeply disturbed patterns, deeply disturbed attachment patterns that really need to be reworked in serious psychotherapy. Can you speak about reactive attachment disorder in kids? They push people away, behaviors harming others. How does this manifest in adulthood with obsession? Well, I am not an expert on reactive attachment disorder, so I can't really speak to that. Typically, we see that, though, in very troubled children, again, often in adoptees, where they were abandoned early. And it would align with what I was just saying a few minutes ago because those children need a high level of containment. Often treatment for them is some kind of, not really inpatient, but a live away situation where they're living in a group home and they have to ask permission to do every single thing because they don't have boundaries. They're boundary-less, and that reactive attachment can lead to conduct disorder, which can lead to antisocial behavior and criminality when it's not really attended to. So these are early attachment wounds. I'd love to hear you talk about guilt and shame and preventing misbehavior of disgraceful conduct, the slippery slope of trying to be different from who one naturally feels they are, first nature, and the need to and ability to develop a second nature. Superior alternatives to shame and guilt, like the corrective self you're describing. Thank you for this is such a great presentation. Okay, so as I understand guilt and shame, and I believe people that are expert on this have corroborated it. They haven't corroborated it, I've read it. That's how I know it. Guilt is an idea. It is an idea and it comes from our left brain, which is logical. It's how we learn to not do things that are antisocial. Like your mother will say to you, don't go and, hassle the neighbor's dog because that's mean. And if you do that, I'm going to make you go over there and apologize. So they're guilting you and shaming you in a pro-social way to not do something antisocial. So if I feel guilty about doing something I shouldn't do, that is a pro-social function. But if I'm laden with guilt to the extent that I can't budge, like I feel guilty at a buffet taking too much food, even though I'm paying whatever it is, $50 for the buffet, that is a sort of reduced sense of self, that I have an unhealthy sense of entitlement versus the person who pays $50 and thinks they could eat $100 with or bring a friend, which is an overinflated sense of entitlement. So you can see where guilt helps us sort of stay within the lines. Otherwise, we would just have anarchy in our culture. But guilt is something that we can be discerning about. It is a thought. Whereas shame is encoded deep in the human organism. It's located in the gut, in the enteric nervous system. And it is visceral when we feel it. Our whole face turns red. We feel hot when we feel shame, right? We blush. And so that shame is there again in a pro-social way so we don't hurt ourselves. So early on, when the mother, says to the baby, no, when the baby starts to put its hand on a hot stove, she is shaming that baby in that moment when she says no, because the baby drops into a shame state and starts to cry. And that is a reminder that that is a bad thing. You shouldn't do it. Now, a good mother will go find that baby and soothe it and apologize and say it's okay, but then remind them that they shouldn't be touching a hot stove because that baby is going to be a toddler at that point. And so unprincipled, unbridled shaming of a child over and over and over again destroys that child's sense of self, destroys that child's sense of self-esteem, and creates all sorts of problem. I mean, in the end, you could say you have somebody with antisocial personality that's going to do all kinds of disgraceful things in life, hurt people, steal from people, rob people, you name it, at the extreme. But the good enough parent is constantly, shaming and repairing, because we shame people all day long when you think about it. Whether you like something they're doing or don't like something they're doing, or praise them for something or forget to praise them for something. When you think about it, especially if you're parenting, shaming is happening all the time. Gaslighting kids is happening all the time. Um, so the idea is that you're repairing all the time also. So this, we have to be careful about our own shame. Like, is this a healthy sense of shame, or is this a toxic sense of shame that I'm feeling right now? I've said this before and I've had people attack me, but I'm going to say it again, that sex addicts are usually shameless when it comes to the lying and cheating that they engage in, especially when they are in a monogamous committed relationship with somebody else. They don't have healthy shame. They're doing what they want when they want it. And that is a result of their own trauma, I believe. But when they start to get into recovery, constantly going into shame of I'm such a bad person and I screwed up and poor me and I'm terrible, that's toxic shame. That doesn't help the person get better. What helps them get better is affirming that they're not a bad person. And maybe they did bad things, but they are a good person and that they can make these changes fundamentally. So these are very broad and simplistic strokes about guilt and shame, but they are important to look at, especially when you've been obsessing about things. All right, so I'm going to leave you with that one little question about how do you tell the difference between healthy and unhealthy obsession, and healthy and unhealthy shame, I would add to that also. And if you would be brave enough to disclose to one person something that you've been obsessing about that can help you look at your vulnerability and help you stop those patterns, then that's one thing that you've done for yourself today. That is an act of self-love. So I'm going to stop here. I look forward to seeing you next in June. I wish you all a beautiful month of May. Whether you are a mother or you have a mother or you don't have a mother, to think about Mother's Day coming up and what that means to you. I was noticing the Mother's Day cards this weekend and how there are no Mother's Day cards for people that have fraught relationships with their mothers. Even though it doesn't mean they're not speaking to their mothers, they may love them, but they're not having a Hallmark experience with them. So find a beautiful blank card, make a card. If you don't have a mother, find someone who you respect or has mentored you and maybe give them some gratitude, or think about ways that you can honor Mother Earth this weekend also. So here's to you being obsession free and fantasy free this month and doing the best you can. And I look forward to seeing you in June. Take good care and see you then.